If this servant of mine then comes across a world which is fighting against him, the hadith goes, ثُمَّ تَكِيدُهُ السَّمَاوَاتُ وَالْأَرْضُ وَمَنْ فِيهِنَّ. And then all of the heavens and the earth and every single creature that lives within this heaven, these heavens and this earth, if all of these plot against this servant of mine, إِلَّا جَعَلْتُ لَهُ الْمَخْرَجْ مِنْ بَيْنِهِنْ. It is not going to be other than I will allow him, I will give him some sort of freedom, some sort of path. I will open up his path such that he can go against this plot. He can foil this plot. Again, if the entire world comes after this servant, God will give him some path that he can undertake to overcome all of the difficulties and the trials that the world sets against him. And then the Imam gives the opposite circumstance. When a servant relies on some other creature of God other than God, Allah says, I will turn the earth against him. I will make the earth barren against him, and I will leave him be. I will not care in which land he perishes. وَلَمْ أُبَالِ بِأَيِّ وَادٍ هَلَكٍ. I will not care whether he dies in the day or dies at night. I don't care whether, what type of difficulty befalls him. He is on his own. One of the lessons that we get from this hadith is firstly that tawakkul isn't just an action that we do. It's not just a one-time thing. I rely on Allah, I entrust Allah with my actions and with my affairs in this part of my life, and in other parts of my life, I do my own thing. I rely on myself. What we understand from this hadith and the other lessons of the Ahlul Bayt is that tawakkul is in fact a disposition that we have towards Allah's creation. We have towards all of our lives. It is a way of arranging our life such that whenever we are faced with any difficulty, whether it is a difficulty in our own individual lives, whether it is a difficulty at the level of our community or even at our society level, a social level, we are always turning towards Allah. In fact, the word tawakkul is connected in Arabic, according to some scholars. They say that tawakkul comes from a similar word called wakal, a person who is weak. And so tawakkul becomes a person who realizes his own weakness when he has to make a particular decision or to do something, when he is faced with a particular affair. And so tawakkul is not just anymore a single one-time thing. It is a disposition that we have. It is a realization that we are ultimately weak in the face of what life throws at us. And so we turn to that source of confidence and that source of trust that we know. And so tawakkul becomes the beginning of our decision-making process. On the other hand, tawakkul also continues throughout our decision. And so in Surah Al Imran, ayah number 159, in this famous ayah of the Quran, Allah says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم فاعف عنهم واستغفر لهم وشاورهم في الأمر فإذا عزمت فتوكل على الله إن الله يحب المتوكلين. So excuse them, speaking to the Prophet. Excuse those people who maybe have harmed you, have worked against you, and ask forgiveness for them, and seek their counsel. And once you have decided that this is the right decision, I have resolved that this is what I'm going to do, then do tawakkul. Rely upon Allah For Allah loves those who do tawakkul, who trust in Him. And so we begin with tawakkul at any point in our lives, and then we end with tawakkul as well. In fact, in an explanation of this ayah of the Quran, there is a hadith reported from the Prophet Muhammad al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, where the Prophet says, وَلَا وَحْدَةَ أَوْحَشُ مِنَ الْعُجْبِ وَلَا مُظَاهَرَةَ أَوْثَقُ مِنَ الْمُشَاوَرَةِ. The Prophet says that once we have, for example, we're still working towards what decision we're going to make, trying to figure out what is it that we should do, what is right and what is good for me, my family, my community, my society, I should take the proper process. This is in response to those people who say maybe that, you people you religious people who maybe rely on tawakkul, you don't make the best decision. You just simply rely on God and then you do whatever, you make whatever weak decision that you want, right? This reliance on God makes you blind to the realities of the world. In fact, what we learn from the Prophet, this particular hadith reported from the Prophet, is that we have to, once we begin with tawakkul, a reliance on God, we have to take the proper steps, make the proper decisions. And that process of making the proper decision, one of those processes is through this act of asking for counsel, consulting others who are more reliable than us. The Prophet says, there is no loneliness more desolate and frightful than vanity and self-conceit, thinking that I know what is best. Again, that sense of thinking that I am a strong, or I'm a wise, or I'm an intelligent person, and I don't need anyone else. And there is no assistance more reliable and trustworthy than advice, than seeking out someone's counsel. So tawakkul then becomes a realization of our inability, not only on a physical level, but also in terms of our ability to make decisions, of the information that we have. And then it becomes a way of actually making the proper decision. Not becoming unable to make the right decision, but in fact, it frees us of that fear. It frees us of that despair. And it starts us on this process of asking for counsel, looking towards others who maybe know something more than us, whether it is about, for example, it is about a medical issue, or it's about a financial or even a political issue. Once we start with tawakkul, we are no more afraid that, God forbid, this decision that I'm going to make, it's going to bring ruin to all of the things that I hold dear. I have tawakkul, I rely upon Allah, I trust in Allah. I take those proper steps that Allah has ordained for me. And then finally, when I have made that decision, then I rely upon Allah as well. I have done my part in the little capacity that I have, and so now I place the decision, the final outcome, the conclusion of my actions on Allah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. صلوات. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. Salawat. Usikum wa iyaya bitaqwallah. I seek forgiveness, and I call all of us, myself first and foremost, towards God consciousness and taqwa. In this second khutbah, I'd like to just mention very briefly that this whole concept of tawakkul that we are talking about, it is not just something that we think about, or maybe even something that we feel. Rather, it is a lived reality. It is something that we have to live. And for us to be able to live this reality of tawakkul, this disposition, to bring this disposition to life, we have to have particular examples within our lives. We have to create or remind ourselves of particular examples that are close to our hearts, that can be constant reminders of that relationship of absolute nothingness and absolute weakness that we have towards God. Today, on the 4th of Rabi'ul'Thani, there are some reports that it is the birthday of Sayyid Abdul Adim ibn Abdullah al-Hassani. For those of you who have traveled to Tehran, to Iran, some of you may be familiar with Sayyid Abdul Adim. It is one of the shrines in the southern part of Tehran, in the city of Ray. And it is said that today is possibly his birthday. Now, whether it is or not, my point is that in various of our cities, in Muslim countries, in Islamic countries, we have these different shrines. Whether it is of the descendants of the Ahlul Bayt themselves, or of just general ulama or pious individuals that people would look up to, would go towards to rekindle that relationship, that connection that they have with Allah. One of the benefits, one of the blessings that this gives us, that this connection to one of the awliya of Allah, one of the Sadat, the descendants of the Ahlul Bayt, is to show us that these principles that we have, for example, this principle of tawakkul, is not just something for those who are, ma'asum, who are infallible. That we ourselves can bring this into our lives. And it gives us those examples, those lived examples that we can use as models in our own lives. In a world where we are filled with cynicism, where the highest leaders in our societies are people who are totally flawed, who are absolutely flawed, what this does to us is that it makes us think that no one can live up to these principles of goodness, of morality, of caring for others. And so these principles are useless. It's something that we can maybe think about. Okay, should we have tawakkul or should we not? We can debate it. And then once it comes to acting on those principles, because no one else does it around us, it becomes just a philosophical or an intellectual discussion. But if we have those lived examples, those living examples in our lives, whether it is, again, those sadat, those awliya, those, for example, the descendants of the Ahlul Bayt, or it is someone within our own families, a grandparent, or, for example, a particularly pious individual within our families or within our communities. What that does for us is that it shows us that these principles we can actually live by. It is not an issue of no one is perfect, because sometimes when we say no one is perfect, that leads to, well, then everything goes. You can do whatever you want in however way you want, because these principles, in the end of the day, no one can live by them. If we have a model in front of us that allows us to live up to these principles and aspire to be like that person. Now, for many of us, maybe that person is a ma'soom, and that is very important. That is the highest ideal. But for those who, or for each one of us who has that ideal, we also have to have particular examples that we see on a day-to-day basis, or particular examples that we remember from our childhood. For example, not every one of us has the privilege or the blessing of going and doing ziyarah of the Ahlul Bayt themselves, of the Imams. And so we would go and do ziyarat of Shah Abdul Adim, as he is known, of this particular Sayyid that is within my own locality. Of this, for example, visiting my own grandfather, who I know is particularly close with Allah. And this is in fact part of the teaching of the Ahlul Bayt themselves. In connection with Sayyid Abdul Adim, Sayyid Abdul Adim was a person who lived during the lives of 4 of our different Imams until Imam al-Hadi, our 10th Imam. And in fact, Imam al-Hadi says to one of his companions, when that companion came to Samarra, where the Imam was being held, the companion comes to the Imam and says, I have these questions. And he asks the questions to the Imam, and the Imam responds. And then the Imam says to this companion, he says that if you have any other questions, you should go and ask Abdul Adim. He is a man of piety, he is a man of knowledge, and he is a transmitter of our ahadith, and he is a man who we entrust. We trust with spreading the knowledge of the Ahlul Bayt. And then the Imam finishes his hadith by saying, وَقْرَأْهُ مِنِّي السَّلَامِ, and send my salams on Abdul Adim. And so we see that the Imams would place these individuals in the lives of their companions, even those who maybe, especially those who did not have access to the Imams. And so we should do the same. Whenever we are thinking about, how should I act in this particular situation? We should think about, if for example I have a grandparent that I look up to, how would my grandparents act in this scenario? How would that alim that I maybe have very good memories of, that I trust, I believe that he is a pious person, how would that person act? And this gives us a way of thinking about and reflecting and contemplating how we bring tawakkul and all of these virtues into our lives, and we live those virtues. And so we ask Allah, O Allah, allow us to increase those connections that we have with our family members, with our community members, and with all of those pious individuals who have and who truly rely upon you. And O Allah, allow us to rekindle and strengthen that connection we have to your wali, Imam al-Mahdi, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajah. And inshallah, through those connections, O Allah, allow us to connect ourselves and to entrust all of our affairs in you. وصلى الله على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين صلوات. وعلى علي أمير المؤمنين وعلى فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين وعلى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة أجمعين وعلى علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والقائم من حجته صلوات. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. صلاة الجمعة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله وأن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قام